Once upon a time, Katie Couric was the longtime host of NBC's Today Show and then the first female solo anchor of an evening news broadcast while she was at CBS. She then went on to start her own daytime program at ABC, and today, as Yahoo Global News anchor, Katie is at the forefront of reinventing TV news for a new generation of digital consumers. Just last month, Katie received the Pat Mitchell Lifetime Achievement Award at the Women's Media Center. So who better to moderate this morning's opening keynote conversation than our very own esteemed Executive Vice Chair, Pat Mitchell. Before they take a stage, let's take a short look at a video of Katie's recent work at Yahoo.
We're coming to you live from our Yahoo News studio here in New York. We're going to get you caught up on what's happening in Nigeria and the efforts to rescue nearly 300 girls. Are you confident that the girls will be found? Where do you believe they are? You do, in fact, feel these 5 justices had a bit of a blind spot?
In Hobby Lobby? Yes.
So you don't think a residual force would have kept this from happening after 2011?
Absolutely, unquestionably not.
Do you think a double standard was at work at the Times?
I don't see gender as being the whole explanation by any means.
One of the great things about the site is it's kind of cheeky.
Our slogan for the whole site is, if you don't give back, no one will like you.
Did you know that he was gay?
It wasn't like hidden, but it just wasn't brought up.
Immigration reform has been simmering on Capitol Hill for decades now. No matter where you stand on the immigration issue or this latest crisis, at least you'll be able to say, now I get it. The world is a big place, but let's make it smaller and easier to understand by exploring it together. I'll see you on Yahoo.
Please welcome to the stage Katie Couric and Pat Mitchell.
Thank you.
Good morning, everyone.
I thought I'd class up the place with my coffee. So.
We could have at least given you a glass cup.
That's okay.
Saying
Hi,
good
everyone.
morning, Katie, is something that many of us in the audience who live in the U.S. are quite accustomed to saying and to hearing. Because as Maureen indicated, for many, many, many years, we started our mornings with Katie as one of the youngest people ever to have a critical anchor role on a network, just the first of the barriers that she has burst through in her career, demanding even then an equal role with her much more experienced at the time co-anchor Bryant Gumbel. I'm going to talk about you for just a few minutes.
Okay.
To give a little context, during those years, Katie proved her storytelling to be the kind of authentic, trustworthy, on the front line stories, asking the questions that you and I would have wanted asked, from natural disasters, hurricanes, earthquakes, to mass shootings, to the national tragedy of 9/11. Katie was there on the front lines. Also during this time, you experienced a personal tragedy, the loss of your first husband to cancer, and turned that loss into a national campaign that raised such awareness about the preventative measures for colon cancer that there's something physicians all over the world call the Katie Couric effect, and also raised $300 million for cancer research. So I wanted to, yes. There is, as Katie likes to say, so much more to the story of Katie Couric than just someone who has been a presence in our lives, telling us the stories in a way that mattered and had great impact. So it's great to see you here, and to see now that you are telling stories in a different way, well, maybe not in a different way, but on a different platform. And if there was anyone that we could have selected who understands what that means to report stories, to do interviews, to bring us the issues that matter in an entirely new digital platform, and looking at the perspective of having done it on all the others. It's you. So let's start there.
Okay.
What are the differences for you and being the global anchor of Yahoo News and the stories that you tell from the way you told them at CBS Evening News or on NBC's Today Show or the Katie Couric Show?
Well, you know, a good story is a good story is a good story, I think, in many ways. And I think that we're actually, I don't necessarily understand it, but I'm in the process of trying to figure it out. You know, I thought, while I feel so privileged to have had the career I've had in television and hope that, you know, that I'll be able to straddle both worlds eventually and have some of the work that I'm doing on Yahoo also appear on television. I think you have to get on as many platforms as possible. I mean, it's no secret or surprise, especially to this audience, that the landscape has changed dramatically and shifted so much since I started in television back in 1960. And, you know, I think...
Just don't tell them I was your mentor.
Yeah, okay, I won't. I hate when people who look about my age say, I grew up watching you. And I'm like, really? But anyway, you know, so I think that what's been exciting for me to go to a place like Yahoo is I have complete freedom to really pursue the stories I want to pursue and do the stories I want to do. And without kind of this word that I constantly heard, particularly when I did a daytime talk show, when I'd come up with ideas like, let's do military, let's do sexual assault in the military. That's such an important issue, and we could really dig, and you know, oftentimes they'd look at me and say, it won't rate. And so for me, I'm able to do elevated work about important issues that I think deserve attention. And I think these issues are increasingly hard to convey on television, because I think as the landscape has become more fractured, things have gotten more mass, and I think that some of the things that are more sort of intellectually challenging or maybe a little more serious aren't getting as much attention as they need to get on television. There's obviously great work being done on television still, but I think the kinds of things that I want to do, it was getting increasingly difficult to find a home for those. And so I'm in the process. I've really only been at Yahoo in earnest since June, because I was doing my talk show, and it was very difficult for me to do 2 shows a day and then do a lot of work for Yahoo. And you know, it's just been really fun. As a friend of mine said, it must be exciting to be in a place that's optimistically expanding instead of managing decline. And so I'm doing things like World 3.0, where I talk to Matt Damon about water.org and water credits, or One World Football, where a man has developed a soccer ball that's indestructible because play is such an incredibly important part in the developing world. And soccer balls last, I think, an average of, you know, 2 minutes because of the terrain that the game is being played on. But soccer in many of these countries and among a lot of these people provides a place where they gather around and talk about all sorts of issues, and can talk about AIDS and talk about girls and gender equality and all sorts of things. So, you know, I'm doing stories like that. I'm doing interviews with people like Ruth Bader Ginsburg and John Kerry, as we just saw. You know, hopefully President Obama will do something with me. And then I do these explanatory journalism is a real trend, because I don't know about you all, but I feel so inundated by this almost tsunami of information. I have never had more information and at times felt less informed, because there's so much and you feel like you never have time to read everything, and there's always more you could read. And I don't know, it leaves me with a feeling of profound inadequacy. And I think I need to talk to my therapist about this. But anyway, so we do explanatory pieces that, because there's so much information, people, I think some of the news programs cover stories incrementally, where we take a step back and say, what is going on with voting rights? What is going on with immigration and all these children crossing the border? Where are they coming from? What is the government policy? What happened in the past that allowed that? Because I feel that people sometimes are embarrassed to say, wait, what is that story? I know it's going on in the background, but I'm not really that familiar with all the facts. So I think the bottom line, sorry Pat, this is like the answer that will not end, but the bottom line is that I'm I'm getting to try things, and I'm getting to do things I care about, and that's why I became a journalist. I'm getting to bring attention to issues that I think are worthy and important. And you know, it's a scary, complicated world out there, and I feel that we need more people covering the kinds of stories that I've been allowed to cover on Yahoo.
And this is why having your voice there is so important for the rest of us who get to be in the audience. And just since June, there are already 1 million people going daily.
Well, Yahoo has 800 million unique users going to their homepage every month.
Yep.
Not every day, I wish, but every month. And you know, what's been very gratifying is we're definitely finding an audience. Now, it's challenging because for the very reasons I just outlined, there's so much out there, so much information. And you know, but I'm trying to kind of do multiple platforms, whether it's discovering my work through Twitter, through social media, through things going viral. You know, there's a whole new art and world out there in terms of getting information and stories disseminated to a mass audience because everything is increasingly niche. And so it has been gratifying. And you know, they say for information in the future, the keywords are video, mobile, and social. Homepages are becoming less significant, although obviously I'd like to marshal all the power and influence of the Yahoo homepage. Discoverability, we're still trying to figure that out. Some of my friends say, I'm having a little bit of trouble finding your work. So these are all things that we're working on with not only an editorial staff, but with all these product people, because in technology, the product people are obviously the ones who are often behind, you know, controlling the show. So I've made good friends with the product people.
Yes,
and
that's very key. You've mentioned so many of the innovations already that I want to unpack just a little bit more, because it indicates a couple of very significant differences for storytellers and people who are interested in reaching audiences, as we all are with stories. One of them is that you have more control and that you have less of the tyranny, as we refer to it, of ratings and time. You now have more time and more control.
Yeah, you know, it was so exciting. 2 days ago, there was a story I read about in North Carolina that I thought, wow, this is a really interesting story. It hasn't really gotten national attention. I'd like to learn more about the story. I'm not going to tell you the story for competitive reasons. I don't want everyone doing this story now necessarily, but no, it brought me back to when I was a reporter, and I was like, wow, I actually have the luxury of time to go there, to talk to people, to make calls. And sometimes when you're in the daily grind of being on television or having to be, you know, appointment viewing, you know, I guess location for when you're doing your work, it does leave less time to actually do the business of reporting. Right. And of real journalism. So that was so exciting for me to go down there and to be able to do what really was original reporting.
And let's talk a bit about your own time, because as you say, we're all inundated with so much information, particularly with news available in so many sources all the time.
You're not going to ask me what newspapers and magazines
No, I'm not. No, although you famously did once.
Yeah.
Katie asked that question of a presidential candidate for those who aren't from the U.S.
Yeah, vice presidential.
Vice presidential, I mean, yes. Oh, my goodness, what's left? Sarah Palin, and it derailed her candidacy, widely described as such. But how do you manage your own time? I went, for instance, this morning online, as I often do, and just entered your name, and the first things that come up are your daily blog telling me what I must not miss. Mm-hmm. So there I already have a long list of links that I have to do. And 10 hours ago you posted this, and 18 hours ago you posted that. I mean, managing your own time to be ever present in the online space is a new kind of challenge for a storyteller. How do you do that?
Well, it's really hard, and luckily I have a social media team who is incredibly helpful to me. I started doing a newsletter, a daily newsletter, because when I did my talk show, one of the people on the staff would curate some of the stories of the day. Back then, they were a little more lifestyle, featurey, nutrition, things that would be more relevant to
to a daytime audience. But I found it incredibly helpful. Instead of having to comb through a million websites and a million different newspapers, somebody actually put them together. So I said, wow, this is so helpful to me. I wonder if this would be helpful to other people. So we do this Katie's FYI, where I curate sort of the top 8 stories, and then usually do some interesting story that might be in the Atlantic, and then that's also a place where I put some of my pieces that I've done on Yahoo. And so I'm lucky. I have a great group of 3 people who help me with that, and I review it in the morning and maybe make suggestions. And you know, this morning I was tweeting about Mike Nichols, which is so sad, and what an incredible contribution he's made to culture and society. And I find that I think it just becomes part of your day. If I'm at the Worldwide Orphans Fund and I'm emceeing an event for that, first of all, I like to let people know what I'm doing, and I feel closer to people who give a rat's ass what I'm doing. and then, but I also, you know, it's a way to be in direct communication, unfortunately, at times, with people who follow you, because there are a lot of haters and trolls and awful, weird people out there who say the most hateful things that you just can't believe. I want to have like a universal response, like, it must hurt to hate this much. But then I think they'll get off on that, and they'll be very proud that I even responded. So I just block them in general, but especially if they're profane.
But you do you have a questions place on your page where I saw people asking a lot of very personal questions.
Yeah.
So you can't respond to everything, but what you have had to respond to in terms of the different ways you tell stories is that you are, in large part, dealing with a different audience, a different demographic. So how does that shape your thinking about the stories that you do?
Well, you know, I've always thought a good story is a good story is a good story, not to paraphrase Gertrude Stein for the second time. But, you know, I just think that, you know, I do things that I think are interesting that, you know, I use my daughters as a barometer. Ellie, my 23-year-old daughter, will be, I love that story, Mom. That was a great interview. I'm like, she's the most loyal viewer of my content. So, you know, I would interview, it was interesting, I interviewed Norman Lear about his book, and Norman is 92 years old, and you would think, and I know he's gonna be here later, that would appeal to an AARP audience. But actually, a lot of people were very interested in the impact that he's had on television, which was incredibly heartening to me. And so I just did an interview with a mother and daughter who did that project. I don't know if any of you have seen it online, but it's the Underneath project, and What's Underneath is what it's called. And basically, they take all kinds of people in front of just a brick wall, and they ask them to tell their stories and talk about their insecurities and how they've been made to feel, whether or not they were heavy, whether or not they had not the right hair, anorexic, bulimic, I mean, all kinds of different people talking about societal pressures and how it's been an impediment to their self-acceptance. And it was a mother and daughter, a daughter who didn't have sort of a tradition, you know, the much desired female shape that we're inundated with in fashion magazines, a girl that was a bigger girl, a curvier girl, and her mom who was a stylist. And together they did this incredible project. And I talked to Tallulah Willis about why she wanted to participate in it. Now that to me would really appeal, especially to millennials and people my daughter's age, although we all are neurotic and have self-image issues. Thank you, media, for that. But, you know, so I think I'm interested in all kinds of things. I've sort of limitless curiosity. So I don't necessarily, it's actually, that's another liberating thing about being at Yahoo. You know, I always had to think of the daytime audience when I did my talk show. Well, will the daytime audience be interested in this? And it was so confining for me. And now I'm like, I think this is really interesting. I'm going to do a story on this. And hopefully other people will find it interesting, or, you know, it reflects my sensibility. And in a way, I hope people who have followed me professionally have implicitly come to trust my judgment. And as somebody who is both a curator and somebody who wants to highlight issues and people and trends and movements that I think are important or worthy.
And you have, and the audience is finding that, Katie, that you are telling those kinds of stories. And before going to the audience for questions, which we're going to do, so get prepared, I want to mention another way in which you're telling stories that may not be as familiar to everyone, but will be, because the documentary that you made last year, executive producing and reporting, called Fed Up, has just broken all records on iTunes and Amazon because it's a story that many people were afraid to tell and didn't tell. It is a story of what the food industry wants us to believe about what we eat and what the truth is about that in terms of our health. So there's another whole form of storytelling with a different audience in mind and a different way to tell it.
Yeah, you know, that would have been incredibly difficult to do if I was on commercial television right now. If I was anchoring the Today Show and I did a documentary basically trashing the soda industry, you know, they would be like, what? Because obviously there are a couple companies that basically manufacture and own every kind of food in America. And I met an incredible documentary director named Stephanie Soteg when I was doing an online show at CBS. So I think I was kind of aware how things were going and had this real estate. And I missed doing interviews and talking to people instead of being like, good evening, in Iraq. And I sort of missed that. And so I did an online interview show. Stephanie had done a documentary called Tapped about the bottled water industry. And I thought it was so interesting, but she had a very difficult time getting any exposure for it because, you know, a lot of people, you know, they're big advertisers, very powerful, the food industry. Some of the talent that she wanted to be on shows, they advertised for bottled water. So it was quite a conundrum for her. So after I interviewed her on my web show, I said, gosh, I would love to do a documentary. Would you ever consider doing something on childhood obesity? Because I've been covering the issue. I don't know if anyone here has seen Fed Up, but as I mentioned in the documentary, I've been covering the issue for 30 years and it just has not changed. It's getting worse and worse. So luckily she said, great, let's do it. And it was such a gratifying experience, Pat, because the ability to do a 90-minute, really careful examination of when the obesity crisis really took hold, which was, by the way, in the late 70s with the McGovern report, and then with the advent of low-fat food, which meant high sugar, because as one of our experts says, when you take out the fat, it tastes nasty like cardboard, so you pump in the sugar. And the fact that sugar consumption has increased dramatically, so much so that in 1980 there were 0 cases of type 2 diabetes among adolescents. 2010, 57,000 cases of type 2 diabetes, adult onset diabetes in adolescents. Anyway, so it was just such a fantastic experience, and I've gotten such great feedback, and it was so impactful, which isn't really a word, by the way, but it was so impactful that I think it's become one because everyone says it, that now I'm doing one on guns, and I'm doing one on dying in America about sort of the process of death and how we talk about death and treat death and end-of-life conversations and how death is sort of treated in other cultures. So that, to me, has been a terrific outlet, and I've been so excited to have that and to just be able to talk to all these smart people about guns in America and not to do a polemic, but really trace the history of what's happened in our country and why it's been so difficult to enact sensible gun laws and what it is about America's love affair with guns and the romanticism behind guns. It's really very stimulating and interesting and exciting.
It feels like you're at that most exciting and stimulating part of your career because you are getting to tell stories in the long, intense form of documentary as well as the freedom on Yahoo. So let's see what other people might want to ask you in the few minutes we have remaining. So we're bringing the lights up a bit so we can see your faces and your hands. So if you raise your hand and identify yourself, please.
There's somebody over there.
Yep, and the microphone will find you. Can you see? Raise your hand again, please.
Yeah, right there.
Yeah, that's one, and then there's one over here.
Hi, Katie.
Hi.
Rich Greenfield. Just curious, when you look at what you're doing with Yahoo, if you look at what Glenn Beck is doing with The Blaze, and You could even look at things like what Shane Smith's doing with Vice News, which has kind of taken YouTube by storm this year. And even if you look at the newsletter level, something like The Skim is doing to kind of reimagine kind of morning news, or what you do in the morning when you wake up. What happens to traditional television? I mean, there's still this massive business of traditional TV that you came from. What happens to that business?
Well, it's funny because this morning, my husband, I know it's so weird for me to say the H word because I was single for so long after Jay died, but John, my husband, said, it's interesting, if Allie said to me, his daughter, who is 16, I want to go to college and be a TV reporter, I would say, are you out of your mind? And I said, I don't really think that's true. I think television is going to continue to thrive. I think, it will have to compete more intensely, obviously, for the marketplace. I think there's going to be this synergy between content that's created online that everybody's going to basically be watching on their television. So I think there's going to be a myriad of choices. And I think the young, I don't know about you all, but my daughters rarely watch television. I don't think they really ever watch television in the traditional form. They watch most everything on their computer, mostly Friends episodes, apparently. And, so but I still think there's an important role for television. I think it's just going to increasingly kind of meld with online content. And again, probably the audience, except for huge, big communal events like the Super Bowl and like the Oscars and things that have mass appeal will still be watched by scores of people. What do you think?
Do you think your daughters would pay for a cable or satellite subscription?
Well, it's interesting because my nephews don't. I have a nephew who's in his early 30s, who's an architect in Boston, and he doesn't have cable. I don't know about you all, but there are a lot of people who are cutting the cord all over the place. So I have to say, in 5 years, I doubt my daughters would pay for cable. They'd make me pay for their cable.
I was going to say that. But when you're doing the stories for Yahoo, you're bringing all the skills and the way in which you approach storytelling on television as well.
Yes, yeah.
And you still plan to be on television, to tell stories
I hope so, because again, I did something recently for Glamour magazine at their Women of the Year Awards, and I did something that was on glamour.com and Yahoo. And I think the key for me, I don't know about everyone else, will be partnerships. How can you reach different audiences by kind of joining forces with other outlets. And now I think it matters less where the product originates. People can't be that proprietary because things get out in the ether and everybody gets to see them. So it's more, I think, almost more about syndication than about working for a large company, at least when it comes to online material. Things aren't really shared as shows necessarily, they're shared as segments or even moments.
And we're gonna have a lot of conversation about that over the next day and a half. There was another question up here. Did it go?
Can I just make one other point, Pat, while we're finding another question? There's somebody. Right, when I interviewed Frances McDormand for Olive Kittredge, she doesn't do very many interviews. We divided it into topics. She talked about aging, and she's so forthright and refreshing. She talked about doing Olive Kittredge. She talked about Fargo. So we kind of divided it up into more digestible bites that people could consume without necessarily watching a 15 or 20-minute interview. I think the jury's out, and everyone says the attention spans are so short, people don't want to watch. I think that's going to change, and I think there's still people who do want to take a deep dive, which is such a hackneyed expression, into content. And I think, I think that we shouldn't dumb down or shorten things so much and make things so shallow because we're convinced that nobody wants to watch any kind of long-form material online, because I think that's not necessarily true. In fact, when James Foley's brother and sister, he was beheaded by ISIS, wanted to talk to somebody about their brother, they actually reached out to me because they knew that on most network television programs, they were only going to be able to talk for maybe 3 minutes. And we did a very sort of emotional 20-minute or plus conversation about their brother, what happened to him, about negotiating for hostages, about U.S. policy. And so I do think there's a place for more in-depth conversations. At least I hope so, because I think it's a very bad reflection on us as a society if we just want things that are 15 seconds long, and we're not willing to learn and become an educated electorate, which I think is so key to a democracy.
And there's so much more freedom for you doing that at Yahoo News. One final question, which we will have to make the final one to
I think that hi, did you have a question?
Make it quick, because we are in the last minute.
Yeah, well, I'm Kate Hurst from Sarah Lawrence College, and I teach in the Women's History program, and you are such an amazing role model for young women and all women.
Well, thank you. That's a nice thing to say.
And I was curious about what advice you would give sort of young, up-and-coming women who might be interested in getting into journalism. I imagine the internet is kind of the place to go, but we're so bombarded with the Twitter and the this and the that. What advice would you have for
Well, it probably goes back full circle to what this is all about, which is learning how to tell good stories, learning how to elicit good stories, learning how to write. I'm shocked at the writing abilities, quite frankly, not to sound like, you know, I'm 95 years old.
Or the lack of them.
Yeah. I mean, it's really, I think writing is such an art and so important that people really need to focus at a time when liberal arts are being besmirched across colleges. And even though my daughters both are studied American Studies and history, and I just think it's critically important. So I think be curious, always ask questions, and try to find good stories. And then tell them in a way and hone your craft. I think there always, hopefully, is going to be a place for good storytelling. It may come in a host of iterations, but I think if you focus on the basic skills and the importance of knowing how to do it, hopefully there will be a place for that kind of work, whether it's in the New Yorker, on Vice, on Yahoo. I mean, hopefully, it's just, we're in such a transitional time, but hopefully the cream will rise to the top. But the people who will do well are the people who are good. So focus on becoming good. Thank you.
And I think that I think that just about sums up this interview in the best way we could say. And the advice I would add to that is find Katie Couric wherever she's telling her stories.
Yes, please.
Watch them and learn from them. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Pat. Thank you.
Thanks.